But using artificial intelligence, Italian scientists are piecing together the text that was lost, and what they reveal through this advanced infrared imaging.
Those scrolls hidden and not accessible anymore. Because of a lack of technology, they had to resort to physically unrolling and thereby destroying most.
October 12th, 2023. A 21-year-old computer science student named Luke Ferreter is sitting in the corner of a house party in Omaha, Nebraska. The music is loud. People are drinking. He's staring at his phone. A message has just arrived from a man he knows only by an online alias, Hari Seldon, named after a character from Isaac Asimov's science fiction. The message contains a link. Ferreter opens it, and on his screen, for the first time in 2,000 years, a single word becomes visible from inside a scroll that was burned alive by a volcano. The word is porphyrak, purple, written in ancient Greek, by a hand that turned to ash 19 centuries before Ferreter was born. And this moment, this word appearing on a phone screen at a college party in Nebraska, is the beginning of something that scholars are already calling a second renaissance. But to understand why that single word matters, and to understand what has been decoded since and why it should unsettle you, you need to go back, way back, to 79 AD, to a coastal town 6 miles from Pompeii, and to the afternoon everything ended. Herculaneum was not like Pompeii. Pompeii was a busy commercial city, crowded and loud. Herculaneum was quieter, wealthier, a resort town for Rome's elite, perched on a cliff above the Bay of Naples, with views across the water toward the island of Capri. And on the northern edge of this town, overlooking the sea, stood a villa so extravagant that when the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles was designed in the 1970s, they modeled it on the floor plan of this very building. It was called the Villa of the Papyri, and it is believed to have belonged to Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, Julius Caesar's father-in-law. Inside this villa was a library, not a shelf of books, a library. The only intact library from the classical world that has ever been found. When Vesuvius erupted on October 24th, 79 AD, the villa was hit by a pyroclastic surge at roughly 600 degrees Fahrenheit. The blast didn't incinerate the scrolls. Something stranger happened. The intense heat, combined with the oxygen-starved environment created by 20 meters of volcanic mud that buried the building in seconds, carbonized the papyrus. It turned the scrolls into something resembling lumps of charcoal, black, brittle, fused together, and essentially fossilized. The eruption that should have destroyed the library is the reason it survived. When workers tunneling through the volcanic rock in 1752 discovered the scrolls, they didn't immediately know what they were. Some were mistaken for coal and burned as fuel. Others were thrown away. By the time scholars realized what they were looking at, roughly 1,800 papyrus scrolls had been recovered from the villa. But recognizing them was one thing. Reading them was another. Every attempt to physically unroll the scrolls caused them to crumble. The papyrus layers, fused by heat and pressure, disintegrated at the slightest touch. Some scrolls were cut in half with saws. Others were peeled apart with knives, destroying the text in the process. Over the centuries, roughly 80% of the library's contents were partially or completely destroyed by the very people trying to read them. Between 500 and 600 carbonized scrolls from Herculaneum, kept in museum and university collections in England, France, and Italy, remain unopened to this day. And nobody dared touch them, because every time someone tried, the scrolls turned to dust. For 270 years, the greatest library to survive from antiquity sat in silence. Readable in theory, destroyed by every attempt to actually read it. Until a computer scientist at the University of Kentucky decided that the only way to read a scroll you can't open is to never open it at all. In 2009, Brent Seals devised a method to use high-energy X-rays to scan the interior of a rolled scroll without touching it. The idea was to create a three-dimensional map of every layer inside the scroll, digitally separate those layers, and then flatten them into a readable sheet. a virtual unrolling. He proved it could work on other ancient documents, but the Herculaneum scrolls defeated him. The problem was devastating in its simplicity. The ink used in the 1st century BC was carbon-based. Carbon ink on carbonized papyrus, black on black. The X-rays couldn't tell the difference between the letters and the paper they were written on. Seals knew the answer was artificial intelligence, a machine learning model that could detect patterns in the X-ray data too subtle for human eyes. Microscopic differences in texture, density, and surface roughness between ink and papyrus that exist, but are invisible to conventional analysis. He built prototypes. He proved the concept, but the scale of the problem. Hundreds of scrolls, millions of layers, billions of data points, was too large for one lab. And then, in 2023, a Silicon Valley entrepreneur named Nat Friedman saw Seal's work and had an idea. Open it up, make it a competition, release the X-ray data, the AI tools, and everything else to the world. Offer over $1 million in prizes, and let anyone, anywhere, take a crack at it. They called it the Vesuvius Challenge, and what happened next was one of the most extraordinary episodes in the history of archaeology. More than 1,000 teams entered: computer scientists, graduate students, independent hobbyists. Programmers from bedrooms and basements around the world downloaded the data and started training AI models to find ink inside charcoal. Luke Ferreter, the 21-year-old from Nebraska, was one of them. Yusef Nader, a machine learning PhD student in Germany, was another. And Julian Schilliger, an engineering student in Switzerland, built the virtual unwrapping software that made everything else possible. In October 2023, Ferreter detected the first word: purple. Then more words followed, then lines, then passages. And in February 2024, the Vesuvius Challenge awarded the $700,000 grand prize to the team of Ferreter, Nader, and Schilliger. Their combined AI models had revealed more than 2,000 characters in 4 full columns of text, 15 passages of ancient Greek, readable for the first time in 2 millennia, pulled from inside a scroll that nobody had physically touched. Nat Friedman said it felt like a miracle. He couldn't believe it worked. So what did it say? The decoded text comes from the final columns of a scroll now designated PHERC.Paris.4. Papyrologists identified the author almost immediately. Philodemus of Gadara, an Epicurean philosopher and poet who lived in the 1st century BC and is believed to have been the philosopher in residence at the villa itself. The text is a previously unknown philosophical treatise on the nature of pleasure. In the passages decoded so far, Philodemus debates whether scarcity makes things more enjoyable than abundance. His answer is no. He writes that we should not right away believe things that are scarce to be absolutely more pleasant than those which are abundant. He draws an analogy to food, arguing that a rare meal is not inherently more delicious than a plentiful one. The passage also mentions a musician named Xenophantos, possibly the same figure Philodemus references in other writings, and critiques rival philosophers who, in Philodemus's words, have nothing to say about pleasure, either in general or in particular. 2,000 years, buried under a volcano, turned to charcoal, and when AI finally read the words, what it found was a man arguing with his colleagues about how to enjoy life. But here's where this story takes a turn, because that decoded text represents just 5% of a single scroll. One scroll, out of hundreds. In February 2025, the Vesuvius Challenge announced its next breakthrough. A different scroll, PHERC.172, housed at Oxford's Bodleian Libraries, had been digitally penetrated. Dr. Brent Seals called it the scroll with more recoverable text than they had ever seen in a scanned Herculaneum papyrus. Among the first words deciphered were adialyptos, meaning foolish, diathropy, meaning disgust, phove, meaning fear, and viu, meaning life. Foolish, disgust, fear, life. Think about the weight of those words. A philosopher sitting in a villa on the coast of Italy, 100 years before Vesuvius erupted, writing about fear and foolishness and what it means to live. And then the mountain exploded, and his words were entombed. And now, 2,000 years later, a machine is pulling them out of the darkness, letter by letter, one Greek character at a time. Scholars confirm the writing style matches Philodemus. The thematic use of the word foolish is characteristic of his other texts, but the full contents of PHERC 172 are still being decoded. What else is in there, nobody yet knows. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The scrolls found so far, the roughly 1,100 recovered from the villa, were found in just 2 rooms, one small storage room and a reading area. Scholars have mapped the villa's layout through the original 18th century tunnels, and there is a corridor that leads to an area that has never been excavated. Richard Janko, a papyrologist at the University of Michigan, and Robert Fowler, a professor of Greek at the University of Bristol, are convinced that the villa's main library was never found. The scrolls we have may be the overflow, the private reading copies, the secondary collection. The primary library, potentially containing thousands more scrolls, could still be underground. And here's what those scrolls might contain. The library so far has yielded works primarily in Greek, focused on Epicurean philosophy. But ancient Roman libraries of this stature didn't contain only one school of thought. The villa's known collection already includes references to works by Epicurus himself, the Stoic philosopher Chrysippus, and various other thinkers. Chrysippus alone wrote an estimated 700 works, nearly all of which were considered lost to history. A significant fraction of them may be in this villa. And the main library, if it existed, would likely have contained a Latin section as well, since Piso was a Roman senator and the villa was a Roman household. Scholars have openly speculated about what might lie in those unexcavated rooms. Lost plays by Sophocles, unknown poems by Sappho, writings by Aristotle that were referenced by other ancient authors but have never been found. Entire philosophical systems that were suppressed when Rome adopted Christianity and Epicureanism fell out of favor. A way of thinking about the world, about pleasure, about fear, about the nature of the gods, that was deliberately erased and may now be recoverable. The majority of classical texts referred to by other ancient authors are lost. We know they existed because other writers quoted them, argued with them, referenced them. But the originals are gone, burned, rotted, scraped clean and overwritten. Every generation since the fall of Rome has inherited a civilization built on fragments. We read Plato because monks in the Middle Ages chose to copy Plato. We lost Chrysippus because nobody chose to copy Chrysippus. The survival of ancient thought was not natural selection. It was editorial selection. And the editors were not impartial. Which is why the Herculaneum scrolls matter so much. They weren't selected. They weren't copied. They weren't filtered through centuries of religious, political, and institutional censorship. They were frozen, locked in time, a snapshot of what a wealthy, educated Roman household was actually reading in the 1st century BC, before anyone decided what was worth keeping and what deserved to disappear. Brent Seals said it plainly. This material goes back 2,000 years. There were people who wrote this. They wrote about love. They wrote about war. They wrote about peace. They argued with each other. These manuscripts are dialogues they were having about philosophical views of the world. And the AI techniques pioneered by the Vesuvius Challenge aren't limited to Herculaneum. The same machine learning models can now be applied to cartonnage, the recycled papyrus used to wrap Egyptian mummies. Thousands of mummy casings in museums around the world contain fragments of ancient documents pressed into layers and sealed with plaster. Those fragments could contain anything: receipts, letters, literature, entire works by authors we've never heard of. And until now, the only way to access them was to destroy the mummy casing. AI has just made that unnecessary. The Vesuvius Challenge has now entered its next phase, with the goal of reading multiple entire scrolls. The technology is scaling. The community is growing. And somewhere beneath the volcanic rock of Herculaneum, in a corridor that no one has entered since the 18th century, there may be a room. A room full of scrolls that haven't seen light since the reign of Titus. Scrolls that contain voices the ancient world tried to silence. ideas that were meant to disappear. A volcano preserved them. Centuries ignored them. And now an AI, trained on X-ray images by a student at a house party in Nebraska, is bringing them back. What Philodemus wrote about fear and foolishness, and the nature of pleasure, was never meant to survive. The eruption was supposed to end the conversation. The mountain was supposed to have the last word. It didn't. And the terrifying part isn't what AI has already decoded. It's that we're only 5% into the first scroll. Hundreds more are waiting. A main library may still be buried, and the voices coming out of the charcoal are just beginning to speak. What else they have to say, after 2,000 years of silence, is a question the world is about to answer. Whether we're ready for those answers is another matter entirely.